Dawn came quietly to the Solomon Sea, a pale wash of color breaking over the convoy. 8 Japanese vessels steamed south from Rabaul on a tight defensive line, 3 small transports, 4 coastal freighters, and 1 converted gunboat acting as escort. The decks were cluttered with cargo, drums of aviation fuel, crates of ammunition, and sacks of rice bound for the isolated garrisons of Bougainville. Their commander, Captain Haruo Kato of the Imperial Japanese Navy, stood on the bridge of the Convoy Maru, scanning the horizon through salt-flecked binoculars. For months, Kato's convoys had been hunted like animals. American submarines stalked the approaches to Rabaul, and daylight movement had become a calculated risk. Yet orders from 8th Fleet headquarters left no room for hesitation. Supplies were to reach Bougainville at all costs. The Emperor's will, the signal had read, is that these men be sustained. By 0700 hours, the sea was calm, the air thick with humidity, and the black smoke from the convoy's stacks hung like a banner. The Japanese had learned to fear silence. When no aircraft appeared, it meant the Americans were already tracking them. Kato's lookouts, perched atop the masts, reported nothing. But 160 miles to the southeast, twin-tailed silhouettes were forming up in the morning light. At Guadalcanal, the 339th Fighter Squadron of the U.S. Army Air Forces was preparing for what pilots called a skip-and-burn mission. 12 Martin B-26 Marauders, medium bombers refitted for low-level attack, were loaded with 500-pound bombs and .50 caliber ammunition. Their target, a Japanese convoy sighted by coast watchers off New Ireland the previous night. The Marauder crews, veterans of the New Georgia strikes, knew what awaited them: tight convoys, heavy anti-aircraft fire, and the narrowest margins for escape. Captain Lawrence Macaulay, flight leader, ran his hand along the fuselage of his aircraft, Patches, named for the countless repairs it bore. 15 minutes, he told his co-pilot. That's how long we'll be in hell. He wasn't exaggerating. Low-altitude strafing runs offered precision, but at the cost of exposure. The B-26's reputation, the Widowmaker, had been earned honestly in the early months of the war. But in the Solomons, its crews had turned the type into a scalpel, trading altitude for surprise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 0815, the Marauders took off from Kearney Field, their engines echoing across the coconut palms. They climbed briefly, then leveled out at 200 feet, skimming the ocean toward Bougainville. Each aircraft carried 8 guns in the nose, ready to tear open freighter decks at point-blank range. In their bomb bays, the 500-pounders were fused for delayed detonation, enough time to penetrate a hull before exploding inside. Back aboard Convoy Maru, Captain Kato received the first warning at 0917, enemy aircraft approaching from southeast, altitude low. His escort, the gunboat Satsuki Maru, went to general quarters, her 25mm guns tracking the horizon. Sailors scrambled to man their stations, hands slick with sweat, nerves frayed by the memory of previous attacks. Kato ordered a 15-degree turn to port, forming his ships into a defensive arc. Minutes later, the first B-26 appeared, then another, and another. They came in pairs, engines roaring just above the waves. Tracers streaked across the sea, smashing into the Satsuki Maru's bridge. Her gunners fired wildly, splashing rounds into the water. Then came the sound every sailor dreaded, the rising scream of bombs. 2 struck home on the first pass, one amidships on a freighter, another detonating in a fuel-laden barge. Flames climbed 50 feet, curling black smoke into the sky. The convoy was suddenly a moving inferno. In the chaos, Kato could see men diving overboard, oil slicks spreading, the sea catching fire. From the cockpit of Patches, Macaulay banked hard, lined up his second run, and radioed, "Stay tight, hit the decks, and don't look back." The attack had begun. In 15 minutes, 8 ships would cease to exist. The first explosions tore open the morning like a verdict. Flames rolled through the Satsuki Maru's bridge, consuming paint, canvas, and men in an instant. Her bow lifted from the water before slamming back, the forward guns still firing blindly as ammunition began to cook off. The sea turned black with oil and wreckage. Captain Shinichi Kato watched from the Kansan Maru's bridge as one of his escorts disintegrated, its silhouette swallowed by smoke. He had seen bombings before, at Rabaul, at Shortland, but never this low, never this fast. The B-26 came in beneath the mastheads, engines hammering, guns spitting fire so dense it looked like molten rain. Every second ship in the line was hit before they could even bring their anti-aircraft mounts to bear. The Tozai Maru took a bomb directly through her cargo hold. The detonation sent barrels of aviation fuel spinning into the air like coins. They burst on impact, igniting the sea. Inside Kansan Maru's radio room, the operator shouted over the roar, "Enemy aircraft, 12, possibly more, requesting air cover from Bougainville." But the transmission never reached. The antenna had been shredded by .50 caliber fire. Sparks danced along the deck as tracer rounds carved through steel. The American formation moved in perfect rhythm, each pair of marauders peeling off, striking, and climbing just enough to clear the rising plumes of smoke. From above, the attack looked like a wheeling motion, a machine's choreography against chaos. Captain Lawrence Macaulay kept patches at 180 feet, throttles open, the nose guns hammering the deck of a transport. His bombardier released a pair of 500-pounders at point-blank range. "Bombs gone," came the shout. The aircraft bucked upward as both bombs struck amidships, seconds apart. The first ripped through the deck cargo, the second detonated deep in the engine room. The ship broke in two. Behind him, Lieutenant Paul Henderson and Lucky Lady strafed the convoy's flank, sending molten metal shearing from gun turrets. The Japanese gunners were brave, suicidally so. They stood their posts even as decks burned beneath them, feeding ammunition into guns that had already overheated. Some continued firing until the barrels burst. On Kansan Maru, Kato gripped the chart table, shouting orders through a haze of smoke. "Zigzag course. Increase speed to 12 knots." His helmsman obeyed, though the engines were already straining. The sea ahead was a corridor of fire, burning fuel slicks stretching for hundreds of yards. Kato's convoy, once 8 strong, was now 5. At 0928, the second wave of marauders struck from the west. Their approach was unseen, masked by smoke. The first aircraft, Marion, opened fire at 400 yards, raking the stern of the Shinsho Maru. The freighter's aft deck erupted, sailors hurled themselves overboard into the burning water. A minute later, another bomber hit the Ryoku Maru squarely in the bow. She folded inward like paper, then vanished beneath the smoke. Macaulay circled for one more pass. His gunner called out, "We're out of rockets, only tail ammo left." Macaulay answered, "We're not here to chase kills. We're here to finish it." He dove again, leveling his wings as tracer fire arced past the canopy. The Marauders' guns tore through the bridge of the last freighter, cutting down officers and signalmen. The attack had lasted just under 15 minutes. At 0930, the final B-26 pulled away, climbing to 2,000 feet. Behind them lay a sea of burning wrecks. 8 ships, every vessel in Kato's convoy, were gone or sinking. The air smelled of oil, cordite, and charred wood. Survivors clung to debris, calling out for comrades who would never answer. On his drifting lifeboat, Captain Kato sat in silence, hands black with soot. He watched the last of his ships roll beneath the waves, the rising sun flag sinking with it. Above him, the B-26 banked once, their formation immaculate, sunlight flashing off their wings. The fire corridor stretched to the horizon. The Empire had sent 8 ships into the sea, and the sea had taken them all. At dawn, the coastline of Bougainville was wrapped in haze. The night had been quiet, but word of the disaster reached shore long before the sun climbed over the palms. Japanese listening posts along the coast had intercepted fragments of broken radio transmissions, pleas for air cover, position coordinates, and finally, static. Then silence. At Bin Airfield, Major Shigekazu Ishii of the 4th Air Group stood beside a grounded Zero, reading the message handed to him by a signal runner: "Convoy from Rabaul destroyed south of Buka Passage. No survivors confirmed." Ishii's jaw tightened. He knew the escorting gunboat had been lost. He also knew those ships carried not just rice and ammunition, but the last drums of aviation fuel intended for his unit. That morning, Ishii's pilots gathered in the ready hut, waiting for orders that would not come. Half the group's aircraft were already grounded from fuel shortages, the rest sat with half-empty tanks. They were aces, men who had fought from La to Guadalcanal, but now their greatest enemy was arithmetic. "The Americans have turned our ocean into their hunting ground," Ishii said quietly. No one replied. 200 miles to the southeast, at Kearney Field, the 339th Fighter Squadron was debriefing. Captain Lawrence Macaulay leaned against the wing of his B-26 Patches, still streaked with salt and soot. The mechanics were already crawling over it, patching bullet holes and checking engines. The air smelled of oil and burnt rubber, a comforting scent of survival. "Confirmed 8 ships destroyed," the intelligence officer reported. "No losses on our side." He spread reconnaissance photos on a folding table. The images showed only smoke and wreckage, black streaks on the ocean surface. Estimated casualties, over 1,000. Convoy commander presumed killed. Macaulay stared at the photos without speaking. He had flown 27 missions since Guadalcanal, but something about this one sat differently. 15 minutes, he said, almost to himself. "That's all it took." The officer nodded. "That's what happens when surprise meets logistics." The attack was a tactical victory, but strategically, it meant more. The destruction of Kato's convoy crippled Japan's ability to supply Bougainville for the next month. Artillery batteries went silent for lack of shells, garrisons subsisted on half rations. For the Americans, it was proof that air power, fast, surgical, and unrelenting, had become the empire's executioner. In Tokyo, the Naval General Staff received the after-action report on April 12. The summary was stark: all transports lost. No air support available. Enemy aircraft encountered at extremely low altitude. Admiral Agaki wrote in his diary that night, "The sea itself now belongs to them." Each convoy is a prayer sent into oblivion. Meanwhile, the survivors drifted. A patrol seaplane from Rabaul found Captain Kato 2 days later, clinging to wreckage with 4 sailors. When they were hauled aboard, Kato refused food or water until the last of his men were tended to. His report to 8th Fleet was brief and unadorned: convoy annihilated by low-flying twin-engine bombers. Attack duration 15 minutes. No possibility of defense. He took full responsibility, though none was his to bear. In interviews after the war, American pilots would recall the attack as mechanical perfection. Yet even they remembered the faces in the water, the flashes of white uniforms, the small figures waving desperately as the burning sea closed over them. One gunner later said, "It stopped feeling like combat. It felt like execution." At Bougainville, Major Ishii walked the length of his airstrip that evening, watching the surf break beyond the palm line. He could see no ships, no smoke, only the endless, indifferent sea. He lit a cigarette and murmured, "The Americans fight with machines. We fight with hope. And hope is running out." The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting the water in red light. Somewhere beyond that glow lay the graves of 8 ships in a vanished convoy. The Empire's arteries were bleeding into the sea, and the tide was carrying the war away from Japan's reach. In the days after the strike, the men of the 339th Fighter Squadron found themselves living in a strange calm. The roar of engines was replaced by the steady drone of generators, the smell of burnt aviation fuel giving way to the scent of wet earth after rain. They had flown into history and returned, yet none of them felt victorious. The mission debriefs were clean, precise: numbers, timings, coordinates, but memory refused to stay that tidy. Captain Lawrence Macaulay sat beneath the wing of Patches, writing in his flight log. His handwriting was methodical, but his eyes were distant. The logbook recorded everything: sorties, munitions expended, flight time, but not the sound of bullets striking steel, or the image of ships disintegrating beneath him. Those belonged to another ledger, one written in silence. Across the field, Lieutenant Paul Henderson was talking with the ground crew. His B-26, Lucky Lady, bore 47 bullet holes. A mechanic ran his hand along the patched fuselage and said, "She'll fly again, sir." "But she's getting tired." Henderson smiled thinly. "Aren't we all?" That night, the squadron mess tent was subdued. There were no victory toasts, no laughter, just the low murmur of men who had seen too much. The squadron intelligence officer read out a commendation draft for exceptional gallantry in the execution of a low-level attack resulting in the total destruction of an enemy convoy. When he finished, no one applauded. Macaulay broke the silence. "They never even fired back properly," he said. It was over before they understood what was happening. Colonel Edmund Parker, the group commander, placed a hand on Macaulay's shoulder. "That's the point, son. That's what air superiority looks like." But even Parker knew it was more complicated. The men were fighting an enemy they rarely saw up close. The Japanese convoy was a set of dots on a map, a series of coordinates turned to ash. The kill came at a distance so absolute it stripped combat of all intimacy. What was left was efficiency, a new kind of warfare, born of industry and precision. In the morning, the mechanics rolled the bombers out for inspection. The sun glinted off the olive-drab paint, the white stencils reading Army Air Forces. On the side of patches, a crewman painted a new mark, a rising sun flag with a red cross through it. Macaulay told him to stop after one. 8 ships, 1 mark, he said. "That's enough." The squadron photographer, Sergeant Frank Whitaker, developed his film in the operations hut that afternoon. The prints showed plumes of smoke curling from the sea, columns of fire reaching into cloud. He pinned one photo to the wall, a B-26 flying low over a burning freighter, the water beneath it boiling. Beneath the image he wrote, 15 minutes of war. Far to the north, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft photographed the wreck site. The resulting images were sent to Rabaul, where they were studied in silence by officers of the 8th Fleet. One noted the efficiency of the attack, each ship destroyed in sequence. Ammunition and fuel detonated first. Enemy fire pattern consistent with coordinated strafing. To him, it was data. To the men who had survived, it was the end of a world. By April 10th, new missions were already on the board, flights to Kahili, Shortland, and Munda. The war did not pause for reflection. The Marauder crews cleaned their guns, refilled their ammunition belts, and loaded new bombs. The sound of tools and shouted orders filled the air again, as though the sky itself demanded constant occupation. Macaulay looked up at the horizon where the sea met the sky, remembering the flames reflected on the water. He thought of the Japanese sailors diving from their decks, the ocean swallowing them in silence. "It's never just 15 minutes, he said quietly to Henderson. "It's what comes after that lasts forever." And then, as the sun rose over Guadalcanal, the engines started again, 12 twin tails gleaming in the light, ready to carve new lines of fire across the Pacific. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sea still bore its scars. For days after the attack, slicks of oil drifted westward with the current, carrying fragments of wood, paper, and human memory. The wrecks themselves lay scattered across the seabed, steel skeletons resting in silence, each one a monument to the precision of American airpower and the fragility of Japan's sea lifelines. On April 11th, a small Japanese patrol boat from Rabaul, the Maru No. 12, reached the area where Kato's convoy had vanished. Its commander, Lieutenant Masao Iwasaki, recorded what he saw in the ship's log: no masts visible. Surface littered with oil drums, cork, and burnt life jackets. Air smells of fuel and death. His men hauled a few survivors aboard, 3 sailors from the Tozai Maru and a ship's cook from the Ryoka Maru, half mad from thirst. One of them, when revived, whispered the same phrase again and again: "They came from the sun." Back at Rabaul, Captain Shinichi Kato lay in the infirmary, bandaged and silent. His report had already been forwarded to 8th Fleet headquarters, and the verdict was inevitable: no fault, no negligence, loss due to overwhelming enemy air superiority. Yet the words brought him no comfort. In his dreams, he still heard the shriek of bombs, the thunder of ruptured hulls, the hiss of fire on seawater. When Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka visited him on April 12, he said only, "Captain Kato, your men did their duty." Kato saluted weakly. "My men burned," he replied. "Duty is not enough to keep a ship afloat." The attack on Kato's convoys sent ripples through every echelon of the Japanese command. The Eighth Fleet issued new orders. Convoys were to move only by night, under cloud cover, and with increased air escort. But the orders were meaningless without the fuel or aircraft to enforce them. Japan's logistical arteries, once stretching across half the Pacific, were collapsing under the relentless assault of American bombers and submarines. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence was quick to grasp the scale of their success. At Guadalcanal, analysts from the 13 Fighter Command examined the strike footage, timing each bomb impact to the second. 8 ships in 15 minutes, one officer wrote. Average destruction rate, 1 vessel every 112 seconds. To the men who flew the mission, it was astonishing. To the strategists, it was confirmation of doctrine. In Washington, the report reached General Hap Arnold's desk by the end of April. He scrawled in the margin, "Proof that precision and mobility are decisive. Airpower must remain the spearhead." Yet amid the triumph, there were quieter reckonings. Sergeant Frank Whitaker, the squadron photographer, developed a new series of prints, wreckage seen from the air days after the attack. The sea had calmed, the smoke was gone, and what remained were only faint oil spirals on the surface, like bruises fading on water. Beneath one photo, he wrote a single line, "War disappears faster than it heals." On April 15, survivors from the convoy were paraded before a naval board at Rabaul. Most were still gaunt and burned, their uniforms ragged. Kato stood with them as the questions began: how the attack began, how long it lasted, whether any defensive fire was effective. When asked for his final statement, he said quietly, "We did not lose a battle. We lost a generation of sailors to machines that do not tire." That same day, across the ocean, Macaulay and his crew received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The ceremony was brief, held beside the runway under the same sun that had lit their attack. The citation praised skill, precision, and extraordinary courage under enemy fire. Macaulay accepted it without a word. Later, in his tent, he placed the medal in his footlocker and closed it. That night, as he lay awake, he thought of the sea far to the north, the black water, the burning decks, and the voices that had fallen silent beneath the waves. Victory had come swiftly, cleanly, perfectly. But in its perfection lay something cold and irreversible, the knowledge that the age of fleets was ending, and the age of machines had begun. By the last week of April 1943, the once invincible fortress of Rabaul had begun to shudder under the weight of defeat. The base still bristled with anti-aircraft guns, its harbors still filled with ships, but the confidence that had marked Japan's advance in 1942 was gone. Convoy losses like Kato's were no longer isolated tragedies, they had become routine. The ocean routes that fed Rabaul, once arteries of empire, now felt more like veins being cut one by one. Each dawn, the smoke of burning ships smudged the horizon east of the Gazelle Peninsula. Allied air patrols, P-38s, B-25s, and the fast, low-flying B-26 Marauders, had learned the geography of the Bismarck Sea by heart. They knew where convoys tried to hide, where clouds gathered in the afternoon, where Japanese Zeros launched from Lakunai or Vunakana airfields. Every new strike followed the same pattern: a radar contact, a sprint at treetop height, and 15 minutes of devastation. At the staff headquarters of the 8th Fleet, Vice Admiral Kusaka's intelligence officer, Commander Hiroshi Nakamura, laid out the latest chart before his superior. Red marks dotted the sea lanes, each one a lost transport or escort. "Sir," he said quietly, "we have lost 27 vessels in the past 6 weeks." Kusaka's eyes lingered on the map. "And replacements?" "None, sir. The shipyards are building escorts for the home islands. The army takes priority for steel." Silence followed. Rabaul had been built on the assumption of supply, an endless stream of fuel, food, ammunition, and men. Without convoys, it was a fortress without lifeblood. Across the base, in the mess halls and barracks, rumors spread faster than official reports. Men whispered about the ghost planes, American bombers that appeared out of the sun, strafed for 15 minutes, and vanished before Zeros could intercept. The sailors gave them a name, Raime no Oni, the Thunder Demons. For the Japanese airmen, the humiliation was sharper still. Pilots from the 204th Air Group, once veterans of the conquest of the Philippines, now found themselves scrambling too late, too low. Their Zeros, designed for dogfights, were helpless against fast, armored bombers that came in beneath radar, their guns hammering from 50 feet above the waves. One pilot wrote in his diary, "We cannot defend the sea. We have wings, but the enemy flies lower." On April 30th, Kato was discharged from the hospital. His left arm remained in a sling, his hearing half gone from the explosion aboard the Tozai Maru. He was ordered to remain in Rabaul to assist the convoy office, an administrative post, a quiet exile for a man who had lost everything. From his window overlooking Simpson Harbor, he could see the ships assembling for the next supply run to La. 8 more freighters, 3 destroyers, a tanker. The same number as before. He requested permission to accompany them. The reply came swiftly, denied. That evening, as he walked along the harbor, he saw the dockworkers loading drums of aviation fuel. A group of young sailors paused to salute him. One of them, barely 20, asked, "Captain, is it true the Americans strike without warning?" Kato looked at the boy's face, sunburned, earnest, unaware. "No," he said. "The warning is the sun itself." On May 4th, the convoy departed. Within 24 hours, it was sighted by B-25s of the 38th Bomb Group off Cape Gloucester. 2 ships went down in flames before nightfall. Back in Rabaul, the survivors of Kato's lost convoy gathered at the officers' club, drinking sake from chipped cups. They said little. Outside, the night sky pulsed with the distant rumble of engines, Allied bombers passing high above on their way to the next strike. In the harbor below, the phosphorescent water glowed faintly around the hulls of waiting ships. The surface shimmered, then dimmed, as if the sea itself remembered what it had swallowed. For Kato, the sound of the distant aircraft was not a threat anymore. It was an echo, a promise that the ocean had changed sides. The empire he had served with devotion now felt smaller than a single horizon, its ships scattered across the Pacific like ashes on the wind. He turned from the window, extinguished the light, and whispered to the empty room, "The sea was never ours. We only borrowed it." The morning of May 13, 1943, broke over the Bismarck Sea with the kind of deceptive calm that had become the hallmark of Pacific warfare. The sky was glass blue, the sea a rolling mirror. Somewhere below that stillness, an American reconnaissance pilot of the 17th Recon Squadron sighted a formation of ships moving east from Rabaul, 8 freighters, 3 destroyers, and a tanker. The coded transmission went out at 0740 hours, convoy detected. Course 110. Speed 8 knots. At Port Moresby, the Allied Air Operations Room erupted into motion. Within minutes, orders were relayed to the 13th Air Force, the 5th Bomb Group, and the B-26 units based at Dobadura. This would be another convoy strike, but the details mattered. Intelligence had identified one of the transports as the Hokuriku Maru, carrying fuel and aircraft parts bound for La, a critical supply lifeline for the Japanese garrison still fighting along the Markham Valley. At 1,000 hours, the first wave lifted off from Dobadura. 16 B-26 Marauders of the 69th Squadron climbed into the thin tropical haze, each bristling with .50 caliber Brownings. They were armed not for level bombing but for strafing, low-level attacks, their bomb bays fitted with 500-pound general-purpose bombs and delayed fuses, designed to detonate beneath decks. Captain Robert Bob Freeman led the formation. He was 27, a veteran of Guadalcanal, known for flying low enough to tear spray from the waves. His men called him Sandpaper Bob because his wings always seemed to come back scuffed by salt. As the coastline of New Britain appeared off the port side, Freeman keyed his intercom, "Keep it low, boys. Stay under radar. We'll be in and out before they know we're there." At 1043 hours, they spotted the convoy, tiny black shapes on a sheet of silver sea. Freeman adjusted his heading, aligning the sun behind them. The Japanese lookouts never saw the attack until it was already upon them. The first pass came in at mast height. Marauders roared between the masts, tracers chewing through rigging and deckhouses. Freeman's bombs struck the lead freighter Kyakusei Maru amidships, lifting it from the water before it split in two. Behind him, Lieutenant George Sampson's B-26 strafed a destroyer attempting to turn, shredding its bridge with concentrated bursts. The sea erupted with splinters, smoke, and flame. Japanese gunners, stunned by the speed and altitude of the attack, fired wildly into the air. Some rounds hit their own rigging. Others struck the water harmlessly. The Marauders circled, reformed, and dove again. Each pass lasted less than a minute, but every one tore another hole in the convoy. By 1100 hours, 4 ships were ablaze. The Hokuriku Maru exploded when its cargo of aviation fuel ignited, sending a column of black smoke 1,000 feet high. One of the destroyers, Asanagi, tried to rescue survivors but took a direct hit from a bomb that detonated beneath its keel. It rolled over and vanished. A Japanese sailor aboard the Taihei Maru later wrote in his diary, "Recovered after the war. The sky fell on us. The planes came like arrows from the sun. The sea turned white, and then red. In 15 minutes, the convoy was gone." Freeman's formation climbed away through the smoke, their engines echoing across the wreckage. Not a single Marauder had been lost. When they landed at Dobadura an hour later, the crews stepped from their aircraft to find the intelligence officers already waiting with cameras and notebooks. The after-action reports would read like a routine entry, but for the men who had been there, it was anything but routine. Back at Rabaul, the reports filtered in slowly. Radio intercepts, then silence. Admiral Kosaka's staff pieced together the loss over 2 days. 8 transports, 3 destroyers, gone. The second complete convoy annihilated in less than a month. In his office, Captain Kato read the final transmission from the Asanagi, "Under attack. Impossible to maneuver. Burning." He folded the paper carefully, placed it in his breast pocket, and stared out the window at the empty sea. For the Japanese Navy, it marked the end of faith in the Bismarck routes. For the Allies, it confirmed what they had long suspected: the sea was theirs now, not by ships or numbers, but by the mastery of air and speed. 15 minutes had erased a month of planning. The Thunder Demons had returned, and this time, they left no survivors. The ocean was quieter now. Too quiet. In the weeks after the destruction of the May convoy, the once bustling harbor of Rabaul began to resemble a graveyard of anchored hulks, ships with patched hulls, stripped guns, and empty fuel tanks. The air still smelled faintly of diesel and salt, but beneath it was something new: decay. The great harbor that had fed Japan's Pacific Empire was rotting from within. By June 1943, Allied air reconnaissance flights passed overhead almost daily. P-38s and B-25s from New Guinea skimmed across the coastline, photographing what was left of Rabaul's naval strength. Intelligence reports noted the same pattern: no outbound convoys, no significant movements. The Japanese were not regrouping. They were retreating inward, waiting for orders that never came. Captain Kato remained in his desk in the convoy office, a ghost in uniform. Each morning, he read the new dispatches, signed off on the supply manifests that would never be fulfilled, and looked out over Simpson Harbor where the wreck of the Tozai Maru still sat half submerged. Its blackened funnel rose from the water like a tombstone. The few officers who still visited him spoke in hushed tones. Everyone knew the truth, but no one dared to say it aloud: the Bismarck route was closed. The sea lanes that had once connected Rabaul to the Empire were now a gauntlet of death, patrolled by Allied aircraft invisible until the moment they struck. On June 20th, an intelligence summary from the 8th Fleet headquarters reached his desk. All surface transport to last suspended indefinitely. Emergency supplies to be delivered by submarine or night barge. Kato stared at the message for a long time before signing his acknowledgement. Submarines could carry ammunition or fuel, but not the thousands of tons of rice, medicine, and reinforcements that an army needed. The Empire's arteries had collapsed into capillaries. That same evening, a tropical storm rolled in from the Solomon Sea, battering Rabaul with sheets of rain. From his quarters overlooking the harbor, Kato watched the lightning illuminate the shattered silhouettes of ships. For a moment, each flash turned the water silver, revealing the outlines of sunken hulls and drifting debris. When the thunder rolled across the bay, it sounded almost like distant bombing, familiar, inevitable, and final. Elsewhere in the Pacific, American airmen celebrated their victories in the dim light of tented mess halls. At Dobadura and Moresby, the crews of the B-26 squadrons painted new kill markings beneath their cockpits, silhouettes of ships, each representing another convoy erased from the sea. The Pacific was tilting, and they could feel it. Each mission now carried a sense of inevitability, the slow but unstoppable unraveling of Japan's reach. In mid-July, a captured Japanese officer was interrogated at Allied headquarters. His words, later archived in the Allied Translator and Interpreter section, ATIS, reports, spoke to the quiet despair that had settled over the surviving convoy crews. We were told the air would protect us. But the Americans do not fight fair. They come from below, from the sun, from the clouds. They never give us a chance to shoot back. It is like being hunted. By August, even the Zeros at Lakunai had grown scarce. Aviation fuel was rationed to the point of futility, pilots flew once, maybe twice a week. The mighty bastion of Rabaul was becoming irrelevant, a fortress surrounded by empty sea, its power choked not by invasion but by starvation. Kato's final duty came on August 11. He was ordered to compile the complete record of lost convoys between February and May 1943. When finished, the list ran 43 pages long. Every line held a name: Kyakusei Maru, Tozei Maru, Hokuriku Maru, Asanaji. 8 ships in 15 minutes. The ink blurred slightly where his pen had paused. That night, he walked down to the harbor alone. The storm had passed, leaving the water smooth and black as lacquer. He stood at the edge of the quay, hat in hand, and whispered the names again. The silence that followed was immense. No engines, no sirens, no shouting of orders, only the sound of rainwater dripping from the rusting railings. The sea, once full of ambition and movement, seemed to listen. In the months to come, Rabaul would endure hundreds of bombing raids, but no more convoys. Japan's ocean empire had ended, not with a climactic battle, but with the quiet death of its ships under the sun. Captain Kato returned to his quarters and closed the logbook. He did not write again. For the Pacific, the war would continue for 2 more years. But for the convoys that once fed Rabaul, the ones that vanished in 15 minutes of lightning and fire, the war was already over.